Okay, this morning we're going to be talking about strategies and interventions for behavior and attendance. Some of the strategies you'll hear are ones that you can take back to use with the students, and that might be what most of you came here to hear. But some of them I think are more important in that we hope to present some strategies and some questions for you to pose with your teams. For you people here today to discuss, so you know where you're going with the team, and when you go back to either discuss with faculty or your leadership team, or if you do have a separate team for these areas with that particular team. So keep that in mind. We don't have time to totally discuss every question on here that we want you to be bringing back. So jot notes for which are the most relevant. Some of these won't be relevant in your school and they're issues you've already resolved. Some of them might be things either you hadn't thought of or you haven't checked in on lately. So the first list of questions to consider are posed here now. What we wanted to talk about here would be the third one. We know that you all have a school discipline policy, and we assume that everybody that's here, because you are on the leadership team, you're familiar with what's in the policy. One question you'll want to think about is every member of your faculty familiar with, and I call it in sync with what's on that policy? Do they all agree with it? Are they implementing it? So to discuss now as a team, how do you assure fidelity of the application of the procedures that you have set up and want the people in your school to be using for discipline? So discuss that now amongst your teams. I'm also interested to know, if you would just raise your hands, how many of you are elementary schools? Great. How many are middle schools? And how about high school? Okay, we've got a good array here. The Graduate First project worked mostly with middle and high school students, but we found that the techniques are so relevant also to elementary, and especially at the middle level, we wish that we had elementary schools involved. So you're going to find that the things we're talking about are just as relevant with your elementary schools and the faculties there. Our strongest predictors of kids dropping out later on. And here you see the relevance for you elementary people. The attendance begins in kindergarten. Once kids start missing, they're not in school, they're not receiving instruction, so they're getting behind, they're getting frustrated, and they're also developing a pattern that they're going to use to escape or avoid what they don't like or feel good about. It's so important, again, that kids are engaged, that they're present in school. You have met with your faculty and you have been to trainings about engagement in academic tasks. We're also talking about engagement in the school, feeling part of the school, belonging to that school. Talk with your teams now. How do you engage your students? What kinds of things in your school help them feel involved, such as clubs? Do you have that rule that every student must be in a club, if you have clubs at the upper levels? How do you perpetuate or encourage a sense of belonging in your school, either through mentor systems or just different things you have set up for your school climate? So just take a minute or two with your team members and kind of outline that.
I'm Mary McAuthor. I talked to our group about really starting early as far as preschool. In my community, when I was an administrator in one of the local elementary schools, we went down to the preschools, took the kindergarten teachers, we worked with them in the community to get the kids really, really excited about coming to school, and also to get the teachers in the preschools have the kids ready to come. After that, in the elementary school, in about fourth grade, Georgia Tech partnered with fourth graders to make sure that they got excited about math and technology, so they started a club, and they made all the kids think that they were math and technology stars. We made sure that our special ed kids were included. We had a special ed teacher to come along with that Georgia Tech person. They brought the mascot with them, so the kids were really excited about that. And I shared with them that out of that group, my daughter, which really thought she was not a good math student, ended up doing very well in math and going to Georgia Tech. So it does work if we start early and building those relationships and getting kids excited about school.
That engagement is so important. As you can see here, we know problem behaviors exist in every school. And I'm well aware that the research cited on here is 1992, but I still think it's true today. And I think y'all may have seen it. I know back in the day, in the early 70s, 80s, and 90s, we saw violence in schools. I was working with the kids in the psychoed programs with the emotionally disturbed kids. And we saw the effects in those days just of cartoons, like the Roadrunner and some of those cartoons where an animal would get killed or die and is laying flat on the road and 2 seconds later gets up again. We had kids that really believed in that. It sort of made them immune to violence. You're seeing it today in some of your TV shows. What concerns me is the brain research that I've looked at recently is showing that we're talking about patterns in the brain that are changing, and especially from some of the video games and the other things kids are doing today now, just playing the games where violence is the answer to solving conflict, and it just comes so easily and it's just so acceptable. So it's something to think about. That is a reason. And again, more reason why we do want to teach our kids the appropriate behaviors, the appropriate social behaviors, how to solve conflict. You're going to find, and it's something to discuss with your team, either when I say discuss with your team, you will have time today for team time, or when you get back, how can you fit into your busy schedules in high school, middle school, and elementary school the time to teach some of the kids some of these social skills that they're going to need, ways of solving problems. You also want to talk about with your teams on the concept of punishing versus setting up consequences, and how else can you deal with inappropriate behaviors. Some of your faculty still are more comfortable with the punishment approach of writing lines or excluding the student from class, as opposed to consequences that fit in with the challenging behavior or misbehavior they had, things that fit in. So those are some things that you'll want to address in your schools. These questions are for you to look at in line with your discipline policy and with your procedures for office referrals or kids going to ISS or OSS. So we'd like for that half of the room to look at the first question up there and talk about it with your teams, and this half of the room to look at the ISS, OSS question, and then the middle tables get to choose which one they discuss. We're going to give you just 2 minutes to discuss these with your teams. I'm sorry to cut you all off because you're getting some good discussion started, but again, it's something to continue if it's relevant for your school when you get back to your school or at team time. I was interested to know how many of you are in the PBIS or PBS process or have trained or implemented some of those. Those of you, how many of you have recently revised your referral forms within that process? We've been advised that this may be something you might want to look at if you're in that process. Looking at your referral forms, are they still relevant? Are they still what you want them to be? We're going to briefly talk about push effects. I don't know how many of you have heard this term. Push effects are unintended consequences for some of your policies that are pushing kids out of school. So in looking with your team at your policy, how many of the expectations or procedures cause kids to miss instruction, miss school? And Debbie's going to give us an example from the school that she's been in.